Hello everyone, Miss Carrie here. Today I'm sharing some fun and very practical stenciling techniques using one collection, the Peel Good Stencil and Die Bundle. If you've ever bought a stencil and wondered, okay, now what? This video is for you. I'm going to show you how to use one stencil in multiple ways so that you can stretch your supplies, save money, and still end up with cards that feel intentional and finished. This Peel Good collection from This Calls for Confetti includes a set of dies, leaf shape stencils, the banana shape stencil, heart shapes, and the top stencil, which is the details for the bananas and the stems, and the coordinating die that will cut everything out at once. This means that you can build an entire background with these layering stencils. If you choose, you can die cut all of these shapes to create your card, or stencil directly onto a card base and add a sentiment and call it done. Now, before we get started, I do want to remind you that the full supply list and affiliate links are in the description below, along with some links to photos that you can pin to your inspiration boards. All right, so the first thing I want to share with you is how different mediums can completely change the look of one stencil. When you place your stencil down, you want to make sure that it's facing the correct direction. On this stencil, you'll see the logo and the stencil name clearly if it's right side up. You also want to make sure that it's secured to your paper to prevent any bleeding or shifting. For this first pass, we're just going to use some basic ink blending. This is what most of you are probably already comfortable with. I am using a blending brush and I'm going to lightly work the ink around the edges of the bananas. You are going to notice that I'm tapping off my brush before blending. This is especially important if the ink pad is a little juicy. Tapping off the brush before blending helps avoid any harsh blobs and keeps everything nice and soft. Now at this point you could stop here, or you can build some depth. I'm going to bring in a second, slightly darker yellow just around the edges. I'm using a smaller brush and I'm flicking the ink in gently. This creates a subtle shadow and instantly adds dimension. Because I used a small, firm brush, you can see those brush marks. I'm just going to go back in with the original brush and blend them out. It's an easy fix. And yes, as I pull the stencils up, you're going to see a little mistake there. I didn't tap off my brush enough and I got a little extra ink around the edges. Once I cut these out, it won't even be noticeable. All right, so I'm going to show you how you can add the different stencils to create various layers. I'm going to bring in the detail stencils to add the stems and lines. When you're working with fine details like these, less ink is always better. You don't want your ink sneaking under the stencil. You want to use light pressure, a small brush, and take your time. Typically, I'll add a light layer of ink and I'll bring in more layers to darken it. Now you can see that those details really made those banana images pop, right? And let's go ahead and bring in the heart stencil. These are to create little eyes and they're just adorable. I'm going to do a quick pass with pink ink. And as I remove the stencil, those bananas are instantly coming to life. Now at this point, you could stencil the leaf layer directly onto the background, or you can die cut everything out and remix it. I'll share what I did with these images later on in the video when we assemble the cards. Okay, now I want to show you how you can take this same stencil and give it a different look with a different medium. I'm going to show you how to create with watercolors. Once again, mixed media paper is your best friend here. I am using very little water. I've just spritzed it right across my watercolor paints, and I'm going to use more of a dry brush technique. When you're working with watercolors and stencils, you always want to flick away from the edge of the stencil to prevent any bleeding underneath. I'm layering a bright yellow, and now I'm going to bring in a yellow green. I don't know about you, but whenever I have groceries delivered, I typically end up with green bananas. And blending these two colors together gives you that unripe look. Now, when it comes to watercolors, you don't want perfect coverage. Texture is what makes watercolor special. So when I lift the stencil, you're going to notice how different this looks from the inked version. We had the same stencil, the same shapes, but it gives a completely different vibe. Now again, you can leave this as is, but I'm going to add another layer. I'm going to bring in a bit of black paint spatter. Bananas naturally have those dark little spots, and this adds some character and dimension. All right, I'm going to set this aside to dry and show you one more medium. Now, I'm not one who uses a lot of texture paste or mixed media on my cards, but today I did want to show you different ways that you could use these stencils. So I'm going to go ahead and bring in a texture paste. Once again, I'm using a mixed media paper for my base. One of the biggest beginner mistakes is adding too much paste at first. You just want to scoop out a small amount and add this in layers. You can always add more. Now, I prefer a silicone spatula, but you can also use a palette knife or an old gift card. You're going to hold the tool at an angle and spread the paste across the stencil. Now we're going to lift this stencil up, and we have these adorable sparkly bananas. Aren't those cute? While the 3 banana designs dry, I'm going to share one more way that you can use these stencils. One of my favorite stencil techniques is to use stencils in a unique way, and for this instance, we're going to do partial stenciling. Instead of using these leaf images to fill the entire background, I'm only going to use part of the stencil. I'm going to add these leaf images around the card to create a frame. I'm going to rotate these as I'm adding ink to each one, and I am letting those images run off the edges. This is going to prevent that cookie cutter look, and it makes the design feel intentional. I'm using a couple of different sizes of the leaf as I work around the edges, and I do change direction with each one. I'm not filling everything in. White space is doing the heavy lifting here. To create a variation in the leaf shapes, I brought in a second green and let some of the leaves overlap. The overlap creates depth, and the rotation creates movement. Now we have a card that looks like we created a custom design. All right, the last step is to assemble our cards. For this card, I'm using the ink blended bananas, which have been die cut using the matching die. I've cut out a couple of layers for my card, and I'm going to add a layer of vellum over the top of that pattern paper to create some softness. I'm going to place the bananas onto the vellum in the same arrangement as the die. I want to make sure that I have my spacing correct. So I went ahead and cut out the images from this brown cardstock, and I'm going to use it as a template to put all of my items in place. Instead of stenciling the leaves, I die cut them from green cardstock. I'm just going to go ahead and glue these in place on my vellum. Using the die to cut out cardstock leaves is a great way to mix textures without any extra tools or supplies. Now that all the die cuts are in place and the glue has dried, I'm going to remove that cardstock template. And then I'm going to apply some adhesive to the back of the die cuts. To prevent it from showing, I'm only adding the glue where I've put down my cardstock layers. I'm going to place this over the top of the card. And then I'll bring in a simple sentiment from the Bananas for You collection and place this over the top. For the next card, I'm going to use those texture paste bananas. And now I did finish them off by using some black texture paste to add the stem and details. And then I used some pink texture paste to add the eyes. The shimmer and dimension really shine here, especially when I pair them with some pattern paper and layered cardstock panels. So I've gone ahead and placed down all of my cardstock layers, and I've used some foam tape to pop those bananas in place. I'm going to tuck some white die cut leaves on either side for texture. And then I'm going to bring in these cute little black bow ties. How adorable are these? These come from one of the Easter collections in the This Calls for Confetti shop. I'm going to go ahead and adhere those two in place real quick. One as a bow tie and one as a hair bow. To finish this off, I'm going to add some little hearts at the top and a cheeky Valentine sentiment because I think crafting should be fun. How cute is this card? I think it's one of my favorites. All right, so for card 3, we have the leaf frame and the watercolor banana. Now in the center, I added some soft blue ink. I stamped a sentiment, head over peels for you, near the base. And then I'm going to place my banana right over the top. So this banana was the watercolor stenciled image. I wanted to bring a little bit of dimension to this, so I also die cut cardstock pieces from brown cardstock. To create that additional layer, I'm going to just trim off the stems, and then I'm going to layer this watercolor banana over the top of the brown cardstock. This creates a little bit of dimension without any foam tape needed. So for those little heart eyes, I went ahead and watercolored those as well. I'm going to use a really thin pen to add some details. You could also bring in a white gel pen to add some highlights. I'm going to go ahead and finish up this final card, and then I'll show you all 3 designs we created today. So today you learned how to take one stencil and one die, multiple mediums, and create 3 cards. If there's one thing that I hope you take away from this video, it's this. You don't need more supplies. You just need more ways to use the ones you already have. I want to thank you for joining me today. If you enjoyed this project, please like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments which technique you're going to try first. I hope you have a wonderful week, and I can't wait to see what you create.